Dancer and choreographer Rosie Kay was forced to resign from her own dance company in 2021 after she was accused of transphobia by some of her dancers. But now Rosie's back. She's got a new company. She's created a freedom of expression charter and has raised enough money to tour a new production which combines her research in the military and dance. Joining me now, Rosie Kay.
Hello.
Rosie, it's a great pleasure to have you back, and it's fantastic to hear that you've got this new company up and running. Do you want to just tell us very briefly what happened before and why this was necessary?
Very briefly, I invited some dancers back to my house. We got into a debate very late in the morning about the difference between sex and gender. And this escalated. They took out complaints against me, and my board capitulated and investigated me. And in the end, I realised that they were going to try and train me into rethinking my own ideas, and so I felt it was the right thing to do was to resign. But I would have sued them, but they folded the company, so
right.
I set up my own new company last year.
But don't worry, everyone, cancel culture doesn't exist.
Yeah,
clearly,
right.
You know.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So this, and especially as an artist, you need to have freedom of thought. And, you know, you weren't being antagonistic or anything, you're just expressing a view and being open to a discussion.
And I think that the arts are the place to, you know, explore all these complicated ideas. And I was discussing making this new work based on Virginia Woolf's Orlando. So, you know, this is these interesting things that are happening at the moment. That's where artists should be. And we should be looking at this and we should be talking about it creatively, mocking it, exploring it, looking at it deeply, asking difficult questions.
Yes.
I absolutely think that's what we should be doing.
Rather than saying there's one point of view that is acceptable and everyone else must shut up.
That's right.
Now, you've created this new dance company, which is fantastic news, and your first project is actually a reworking of a project you worked on back in 2010, I believe, yeah. 5 Soldiers.
Yep.
And can you tell us a bit about this show?
Well, it's got quite a strange genesis. I was kind of at the peak of my performing career and I suffered an injury on stage and was told I wouldn't dance again and it would take me a long time to walk again. I was obviously in, like, complete shock. And following the operation, the reconstruction on my knee, I had this very vivid dream that I was lying on a desert battlefield and my leg had been blown off. And it made me question ideas both about the body and the soul, but also, as a dancer, I'd have done anything to get back on stage and perform again. And it was a long time ago, it was the time of the Iraq War, and I looked at the faces of young soldiers killed in Iraq on the news the next morning, and I wondered how on earth do you train and prepare a body that doesn't just risk injury, but you actually risk your life. And maybe it's not like the movies, maybe they're not brainwashed, maybe there's some real excitement in that training, a bit like a dance training can be very, you know, there's lots of thrills as well as lows. So that took me on a journey and I ended up getting embedded with an all-male infantry battalion. And I spent time training with them and kind of went from being a very scared, nervous observer to a full-blown trained participant fighting against a rival battalion. Wow. And then to kind of change that completely, I then spent time at Headley Court, which is the rehabilitation centre, and the Royal Centre for Defence Medicine. And by that time, the people I'd been training with on Dartmoor and in Salisbury, they were the ones coming back with these, what they were calling complex trauma injuries. So multiple loss of limbs, legs, arms. And soldiers were surviving from injuries that they would have died off, you know, just a few years earlier. That circle, that golden hour was getting so good that the army was then also dealing with this kind of there was going to be another generation of injured soldiers who would come back into civilian life.
Yes.
So I made a show about this, exploring, like, the making, breaking and putting back together again of soldiers and their bodies, but also a real insight into their personalities.
And where will this be on? It's on this week, isn't
It's on at Norwich Playhouse, and then it tours to Bath Theatre Royal and Blackpool Grand.
And before we finish, because we unfortunately don't have much time, what do you think of the future of the arts in this climate? You know, where do we go from here?
I think people really have to be getting a bit tired by now, and I think it really is time to start to kind of, like, group together and speak together. I'd like to look at something like a conference that brings people together to look at the law and discrimination, and then I'd like to look at toolkits for venues, how to survive this time, and also for artists what to do if this happens to you.
Yes, because it's happening to a lot of people, isn't it? And people are feeling like they have to be silent when they need to express.
And that's right. And I seem to be sort of the agony aunt that's kind of like, you know, listening to people, seeing if they've got a really terrible case or not, pointing them in the right direction for legal advice, saying when it maybe should go to the press, talk to them about crowdfunding. You know, I seem to be this advice centre because they know that I've been through it, and you can get through it. We've got to get through this because we're going to lose our best artists.
And you're actually doing something now. You're creating something. You're not sitting there and wallowing. You're getting out there and
And it was amazing listening to John Cleese, because I've never been more aware of my own creativity again, because I lost it. To be back in the studio, you know, to be trustful, to be playful, it's absolutely essential. I'm having a blast. It's brilliant.
Fantastic. Rosie Kay, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate that.